Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast, empowering you with simple, practical, step-by-step spiritual tools and practices to follow your purpose and light up the world. You can access all episodes of the podcast on all podcast platforms, and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos and interviews all about finding and following your life purpose. My name's George Lizos. I'm a spiritual teacher, psychic healer, the #1 best-selling author of Be the Guru, Lightworkers Gotta Work, and Protect Your Light. And today I have with me Lisa Campion. Lisa Campion is the author of the #1 best-selling books, The Art of Psychic Reiki and the award-winning Energy Healing for Empaths, as well as the upcoming books Awakening Your Psychic Ability and Psychic Awakening Journal. She's a psychic counselor and Reiki master teacher with over 30 years of experience who specializes in training emerging psychics, empaths, and healers to fully step into their gifts since the world needs all the healers it can get. Lisa, welcome to the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, George. I'm so happy to be here and to speak with you again. I loved having you on my podcast, and I'm so pleased to be here with you today.
Yes, and as I was telling Lisa earlier, our work is so aligned, so I know we're going to have such a fabulous conversation about your book, Energy Healing for Empaths. But before we get into it, I want to hear briefly about your story in getting to awaken to your psychic abilities and coming to this stage right now where you're teaching empaths and psychics how to do this as well.
So thank you. Yeah, so I was definitely one of those very psychic children. I was born with my gifts. And I was born in the 60s, so I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it was extremely unusual to talk about it. I don't think it was so unusual to have it, but nobody talked about it. It wasn't something you could find a podcast on or find even books about. So I spent a lot of my childhood, first of all, trying to pretend I was normal and fit in and not be considered crazy, right? And then I also spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was happening for me. And my experience was kind of 50-50 with understanding myself as an empath and seeking to do that, and also understanding the psychic experiences that I was having. And I mean, I've just had a very lucky and spirit-driven journey to get to the point where I am now. But I eventually, started working as a psychic when I was 19. That was like 1987. And there was nobody talking about it, nobody doing it. So I really had to learn everything the hard way. And I'm very excited about being able to share what I've learned over the years and help people who are emerging, who are just realizing they have gifts, or the young people who are coming in even more psychic than I ever was now, to help them understand it the easy way and not kind of have to suffer, and feel like they're crazy or feel overwhelmed the way that I did.
Yes, and I think it's really important that, although it was hard for you to go through it the hard way, it's really you're in a very powerful position right now to teach it in an easier way for people.
That's right.
That maybe they don't have the same kind of struggles that you went through, but at the same time, there's so much content right now. Sometimes it can get overwhelming and sometimes you can be misled. So it's wonderful to have someone like you with 30 years of experience to guide a new generation of psychics. I think that's wonderful. Because we need training, and that's something that I found in my own career, that there isn't a lot of training for psychics, and it's so important because the spirit world, it's complicated and you need to know how to navigate it. So let's talk about empaths, and I want to talk about empaths and energy vampires because I love how you talk about energy vampires in the book. You go into depth about it. But let's first define our terms. Most people are familiar with the term empath. I'm empathic. I feel other people's emotions. But I want to hear you a little bit talk about what is an empath.
Yeah, I really think that it's kind of like a spiritual calling, So I see kind of the deeper purpose behind it. And I love how much you talk about purpose, but I feel like our life purpose is to serve, to help, to be healers in some way. Not everybody has a healing practice the way I do. Some people are just serving where they are, like showing up in the world and helping in corporations or with their families or wherever they're already working. But I do feel like it's those gifts that we have the ability to tell what people are feeling inside their bodies or what their emotions are, or even tell what they're thinking. Because I think many empaths have the ability to read the thoughts of others as well. that is to show us, is like, it's like a built-in diagnostic machine, a built-in MRI X-ray machine for people who are meant to serve and help other people. That's really, I think, the deeper part of it. And until we learn how to manage our sensitivity, and so that we can be in the world on a day-to-day basis, it really does feel like a curse. Like, it doesn't feel like a gift. But the good news is, when we do learn how to manage our sensitivity in all the ways you talk about in your book, and that I do as well, you know, then we can make that transition to feeling sort of victimized by being oversensitive, and step into the power of what our gifts really are. Because I do think it is a superpower, for sure.
Yes, and I love that you talk about the purpose of being an empath, because I 100% agree with you. We come here for the purpose of serving.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we don't know how to manage our energy skills and our energy in general, then we overserve. And that's when we
Yes.
start exhausting ourselves, or allow energy vampires to abuse us and therefore
Hmm.
deplete us and prevent us from following their purpose, which is why it's so important to learn how to heal our energy, replenish our energy, and protect our energy. So let's talk about these type of energy vampires that we've all encountered as empaths. In the book, you talk about 3 types of energy vampires. Can you share this with us?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think that, let's start with the predatory or the narcissistic type. I think that's the one we all kind of think about the most. And it is definitely, if you've had an encounter with that, something you're going to remember. Like, you're going to need therapy and energy work, and you probably crashed your health and all those things too. But I know we all have had experiences with that. And those people are really like the shape-shifting, predatory, like sort of psychopathic narcissists, you know, that really have no a way to, they don't know how to source their own energy, so they latch onto somebody like us, and they're really incredible, like almost like method actors, you know, like they're very psychic, so they feel what it is you need and want, and they shape shift into being that person, sort of like, that's where they set the hook, and they go kind of through that love bombing stage. And if anyone has read about narcissistic abuse, or, you know, that whole movement out there, which is super helpful for people if we have been with, you know, a predatory energy vampire, we need that work. But that's where, and they just, once they set the hook, then they start to drain us. And it can be your life force energy, your money, your time, your attention, your credit, the gas in your car, the food in your fridge, everything that you have, they take. And they don't really have any remorse when they've drained you dry. They move on. They just get up and find somebody else. And we are that sort of supply, that narcissistic supply, that battery that they need. And it's really a problem.
Yes, and I feel
Yeah.
like we've all experienced the
Yes.
narcissistic personality type in one way or the other. So, what is the second
Absolutely.
type of an energy vampire? I'm guessing it's something more subtle, more
It is.
covert.
It is more subtle. I call it the victim vampire. And there are people who, and I'm not saying that we haven't all been victimized, because we all have been through difficulties and had hard things that, you know, we've had to deal with. But the victim vampire really, like, they don't sort of move on from whatever's happened. They learn how to use their story, their pain, their suffering as kind of a currency, you know, for they need help, they can't do it, they need you to show up for them. They tend to be very trauma addicted, so they're the friend that calls you with the same trauma they've had. Every single time you talk to them, they talk for an hour.
Tell me about it.
They don't have an interest in changing, so they don't really want to take your advice or do. And they're like, oh, I feel so much better for talking to you. And then as soon as you want to talk about yourself, they're like, gotta go. And
Oh
you
gosh,
know,
yes.
that's really like, and you just literally, I remember a conversation like that when I was quite young, literally like laying down on the floor and taking a nap. Like, afterwards, I couldn't even move. And I was like, oh, that's, they're sneaky. And I think mm, they're less conscious of the fact that they're doing this. I mean, they can be quite manipulative, but if you and they use guilt sort of as a lot of their manipulation. But if you say, you know, you're really an energy vampire, they're often quite shocked. They don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I drain George to death today? They're just hustling, trying to get through the day, like we all are in a way. But this is model it. This is their way. They've learned to do it. And we need to set boundaries. We just need, like narcissistic kind, you just kind of have to cut and run if you can. You just kind of have to get away. But this type, this victim type, we need to set boundaries and say no. You need to decide how much time you're willing to spend and then stick to that.
I've had most experience with these types of energy vampires. I call them drama queens and kings because, and I've had a few of them in my life. And I find, I don't know from your experience, I found that many empaths, we draw them into our lives because we want to help. And therefore we want to practice our skills. So we draw them, like to give them a reading, for example, or just try to help them and practice our skills until it becomes too much. And they constantly latch on our energy field, sucking away all our energy, and we feel completely drained. I've had to cut so many people out of my life. And you're right, setting boundaries was so important, and it's so liberating. And now I'm so stingy with my time and energy because I know that I have to direct it in the right way for me to create maximum impact in my life. So what is the third type of an energy vampire?
This is something I think we all can relate to, and this is a situational energy vampire. And I think we all fall in hard times, you know, and there are times in our lives where we just are under so much stress or under so much change. Maybe you're going through an illness, or you divorce, or a breakup, or you've been through a natural disaster that, you know, this is happening all over the world right now. Where you're just in a tough time and you don't have anything to give, and you need help. You need help. And once the situation is resolved, you will shift out of that state. So I really want people to think about energy vampirism as something that we all can fall into, because actually there's a fourth kind, and that is the empaths themselves. And there's always this moment where I have to like hold everyone's hand and tell all the empaths I love them, but we need to make sure we've not become so drained that we are now an energy vampire. And this happens a lot to empaths. It's kind of the fourth kind, really.
Oh gosh, so important. I love that you talked about empaths as well, sometimes being energy vampires, because we always need to look within as well whenever it is we're attracting someone. And I found that whenever I've attracted energy vampires in my life, yes, I had to create boundaries and use energy tools to like protect myself, but at the same time eventually I had to look within and ask myself what within me is allowing this to happen. And there was a need that I wasn't seeing, there was a fear, a limiting belief, a trauma, something that allowed it to come to the surface. And I found that's such an important part and a tough love point for light workers to take in. Now, in the book you talk about lots of practical tools to setting boundaries. Can you share a couple with us?
Sure. Yeah, I sort of break it into two categories. In the first category, because I started my life as an energy healer, I could really see that empaths have a different energy field than non-empathic people, and that we really are like a big sponge. And that outer layer of our energy field, instead of being like a bubble, it's like porous, like a sponge. And so the first thing that I always teach people to do is to address this, and really to go inside, become a bubble, you know, and to create an energetic boundary with the world, you know, and then learn some other these foundational energy management techniques you also talk a lot about in your book. How do we ground ourselves? How do we clear the energy we've picked up from other people? How do we replace our lost energy? And how do we be more energetically boundaried? And I talk about many different ways to do this. I use like a really quick breath and intention process of breathing and intending, imagining, visualizing that these things are happening. And I feel like once we have an energetic boundary, it kind of gives us a leg to stand on. It makes it a little stronger to do the harder boundary setting, which is actually this sort of psychological part of saying no, figuring out what we're a yes or a no to, and then learning how to deal with the complicated relationships and situations, how to set boundaries in your actual life with actual other people.
I love that you combine the two practices because it's so important. It's not just the energy boundary work, it's also the physical boundary and also the the communication boundaries that we need
Mm,
to implement as well. Sometimes we just put a shield around us and we feel like, okay, that's enough. But
right.
like you said, I find that the energy shield enables us and
Hmm.
strengthens us to learn how to say no. That's why
That's right.
I like to start with the energy boundary,
Me
and
too.
then you feel so much more empowered to step
Yes.
into and say, you know what, let's just take a break.
Right.
I have to go.
I know. And I think that it's like a habit. So we have a habit of being a sponge. Now we
Yeah.
need a habit of being more boundaried and energetically. And it's like building a muscle, developing a muscle. And if we practice these
Yes.
energetic practices, help us build this muscle that we can then use in other areas of like, how do you actually have to say no? And how do you feel when you're a yes or a no? Because a lot of times, like one of the things I do is I try to never say yes in the moment. I always, people ask me things, I always say, let me get back to you. I got to check my calendar. I'll be back to you tomorrow in 24 hours. Because I always want to say yes in the moment. I'm like, of course, I feel that person. I want to help. I really care. Empaths really care. We really are
Yes.
so kind. We're so compassionate. It's our purpose to care and to help. So we feel it in the moment. And I've just learned how to say, I'll get back to you. And I literally have to sit alone in a room by myself with my calendar and kind of meditate and think about what are my goals? Does this in alignment with what I need to do right now? How much time do I have? Like all these factors. And then I can feel in my body, usually if I'm a yes or a no. And then I've practiced a lot of really, really nice ways to say no.
Yes. One of my, first of all, I love this hack of like not saying yes immediately and giving it some time so you can go and plan.
Mm,
And I've also practiced ways of saying no. And one of my favorite ways is you start by acknowledging and thanking the other person. Thank you so much for this offer. Although I
yeah.
would love to attend, I blah, blah, blah. And then you make an
Hmm.
excuse. And this
Yes.
combination softens it a little bit, while at the same time,
Yes.
leaving the door open for future collaboration, for example.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I've also found that many empaths are afraid of saying no because they don't want to be aggressive or passive aggressive. And I found that the balance between the two is being assertive, which
Mm,
means respecting your emotions, but also respecting the other person's emotions. So you're not being aggressive saying, no, I'm not going to do it, and no is a complete answer. I mean, that works for a lot of people, but I feel for sensitive empaths, sometimes it doesn't. So we need to
no.
soften it a little bit by
Yeah. We
just
need to be
acknowledging
nice.
how, yes, acknowledge how the other person is feeling, but at the same time respect how we're feeling as well. So you're
Hmm.
not being aggressive or passive aggressive. You're not being passive. You're being assertive. You're stating, you know
Yeah.
what, this is who I am. This is what I want. This is what's happening.
I had to
Okay.
practice these things in the
Yes.
mirror. Like I practiced them. Like I wrote down like 5 or 10 examples, and I just like look myself in the mirror and say it until I could say it and hold my own eye contact and keep a smile on my face. And
Yes.
now they just kind of come out of me naturally in a much better way.
Yes, it's so hard when you're not used to saying no. I used to work with people and have them would request something, and I told them
Mm.
you just have to say no, and they couldn't, even though it was like role playing. It's funny how we're programmed to be
I
yes
know.
people.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's shift this, let's flip it around a little bit. What if we found out someone's listening right now and be like, oh my God, I am a narcissistic energy vampire, or I'm this kind of energy vampire? How do you start healing that?
Mm. Well, I was surprised by when I came out with this book, how many people emailed me with that same question. And I, sometimes I would say like we have to start with really doing that inner looking, that you were talking about, like how going inside, what do we need? What are we lacking that we're trying to get from other people? And how can we resource ourselves so we have a full energy tank and we don't need to I think so many people, we just don't know how to source energy, so we are all unconsciously stealing energy from each other all the time. And so to become aware of that and to figure out what fills you up is really important, and to practice empathy, to practice putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Like, well, if I like, before I say this, how would I feel if somebody said it to me? Now, empaths, we never have to do that because we're naturally like, we do that automatically without thinking about it. We're always thinking about how other people feel. But it is a skill that we can learn, if we're not wired that way. And there are quite a lot of trainings actually on how to cultivate empathy if you don't have it. So you can
And
learn, you can take a class in that.
yeah, there's so many classes, both psychological and spiritual. And speaking of the
Yeah.
spiritual and the energetic, you talked about we need to learn how to source energy for ourselves. I find this fascinating.
Mhm.
Can you share a little tip on how we can start like sourcing our own energy and nurturing it? This is how I call it in my work, like nurturing your light, nurturing your energy.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot to it, and there's a lot sort of from the earth itself has a lot of energy. So when we ground and we learn to connect to the earth, we can always draw energy up, into us from the earth. I think that's one of my daily practices. I think that we need to nurture our body so we can draw energy from sunlight, from the food that we eat, from the self-care that we do, from sleeping, from things like that we overlook as being unimportant, like play, like creativity, you know. Play and creativity are two, I think, of the most powerful ways we refill our energy tanks. I like to think about an energy tank. Like you have a gas tank in your car. You don't expect your car to drive without putting gas in it. That's crazy. Who would expect that? But we expect ourselves all the time to function at our peak level without putting energy in our energy tank. And it can be the simplest thing for me. It's unscheduled time, which is something I almost never get. You know what I mean? Like time with nothing to do, time in
So
nature, time with
powerful.
friends. So, right? It's so, or time to playing or just doing creative things. So, I recommend people make a list of the top 10 things that puts energy in your energy tank. And I say I put it on my fridge because sometimes you stick your head in the fridge and what you're not really looking for food. What you're looking for is this other form of energy. And I think the last thing is really spiritual. We can draw spiritual energy, and that's like having a spiritual practice like meditation or yoga or tai chi or connecting with guides like angels, and prayer, church, synagogue, temple, whatever you do. um this earthly energy and this divine energy, we can always just absorb it if we intend to, and we connect to those sources. And then we need to take care of ourselves, really.
It's really like
Yeah.
optimizing our whole lifestyle. This is something that
Yeah.
I teach when I in my in course intuition mastery school, that I also train like psychics in doing this work. And we have an entire module on optimizing your lifestyle, like food, meditation, spiritual
Yeah.
practice, relationships, like the
Yeah.
house we live in, the energy of the house. It
Hmm.
all has to nurture our intuitive abilities, our energy, so that we don't
Yeah.
search for it in substances, in people, in
Right.
activities, in hobbies, in whatever it is we choose to abuse, our drug of choice.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, Lisa, what a powerful conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours because we're on the same page. And I love talking to you. And thank you so much for sharing, first of all, for writing this book and for sharing this time with us. Can you please let everyone know where they can get your book from?
Sure. Yeah. Anywhere books are sold, Amazon, any local bookstore that you have, are places you can get it on my website, which is lisacampion.com. And I'd love it if you would come by and visit. I have a lot of resources, free resources for empaths, especially available on my website. So come over and visit.
And of course, be sure to go check out Energy Healing for Empaths by Lisa Campion. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Have a lovely rest of your
Oh,
day.
thank you so much for having me here.